Well, we are getting breaking news out of Iran at the moment.
Israel has launched what it calls a preemptive strike on Iran's nuclear facilities and other military targets.
Overnight, Iran's retaliation, missiles raining down on Tel Aviv.
On the 13th of June 2025, Israel launched a surprise attack on Iran. In the days that followed, they bombed multiple targets, assassinated scientists and military leaders, and with the help of US bombers claimed to have obliterated Iran's nuclear program. Iran responded, but its missiles were mostly shot down, and 12 days later it agreed to a ceasefire in what appeared to be a triumph for Israel. This is just the latest military campaign from Israel in the last 2 years. Following the October 7th attacks that left over 1,100 dead, Israel has prosecuted a brutal war in Gaza against Hamas, killing fighters as well as thousands of civilians. It has fought Hezbollah in Lebanon, killing hundreds by rigging their pages with explosives and through other operations, and it has launched strikes against targets in Yemen, as well as taking territory in Syria and destroying much of its air force and navy. After the failure to protect its citizens in 2023, Israel once again appears militarily dominant. And yet, despite this dominance, in this video I will argue that Israel's military actions have a critical weakness, that its approach to military force is fundamentally flawed, and that unless this changes, Israel will never have the security it so desperately wants. To explain Israel's weakness, I actually want to go back in history, to Europe at the time when Napoleon Bonaparte was at the height of his powers. His armies have conquered most of Europe, all apart from Britain, which continues to oppose him. To put pressure on Britain, Napoleon set up a trade embargo, forbidding any country in Europe from trading with her. It was a good idea, but he had a problem: his supposed ally, Russia. Tsar Alexander had started trading with the British again, and in response to this, Napoleon now decided to invade. On the 24th of June 1812, he led an army of around 600,000 men into Russia. In the Russian Imperial Army was a young Prussian officer, a soldier who would observe all that was to follow and who would go on to write one of the most influential books ever written about war and strategy, Karl von Clausewitz. If you've heard of Clausewitz, it's probably because of one line that has become kind of famous.
War is a continuation of politics by other means. Von Clausewitz.
When Clausewitz wrote this, part of what he was reacting to was a view of war as a technical craft, a domain of scientific rules, maneuvers and logistics best left to military professionals and kept away from politicians. Clausewitz, however, argued war consisted not just of combat but of politics. In other words, you can fight all you like, but the outcome you're looking for isn't military victory but political victory, to change the mind of your adversary.
I've made it clear time and again, Israel will never allow those who call for our annihilation to develop the means to achieve that goal. Tonight, Israel backs those words with action.
Netanyahu argues Israel attacked Iran to stop it threatening Israel with a nuclear weapon. As happened with Israel's actions against Iraq in 1981 or against Syria in 2007, these attacks have, he hopes, set back Iran's nuclear program and so will keep Israel safe. Supporters might also argue these attacks will change Iran's mind about continuing its program. After all, what's the point in having a nuclear weapons program when it's expensive, leads to sanctions, and only ends up getting bombed? Netanyahu and Trump have even suggested these attacks could lead to the whole regime toppling, which seems possible. Iran's economy is struggling, and there have been many protests in recent years. I should say at this point, in many ways this would be a good outcome. The Iranian regime is horrific, not least to its own people, and Israel is not the only Middle Eastern country that doesn't want it to have a nuclear bomb. But how likely is this optimistic scenario? When Napoleon invaded Russia, he hoped it would force a decisive battle with Tsar Alexander and thus resolve the dispute one way or the other. In previous years, this is how he had dealt with Austria and Prussia, in both cases winning decisive battles and occupying their capital cities, leading to the political outcome he wanted. In fact, it was the humiliating peace Prussia signed with Napoleon that had driven the angry Clausewitz to leave the Prussian army and enter Russian service. But this isn't what happened in Russia. The Russians generally avoided direct confrontations, retreating continually east and destroying the farmland as they went so that there were fewer supplies for the French army. And instead of defending Moscow, they abandoned and set fire to it. The problem for Napoleon was that he had miscalculated the incentives, the position, the politics of his adversary. He misread how important ending the economic pain of the embargo was to Russia, especially amongst its powerful merchants and nobility, and the need Tsar Alexander would have, if he wished to retain his legitimacy and power, to resist the bullying actions of France. Napoleon also overestimated the importance of Moscow. St. Petersburg was the true capital, and misread how Russia would fight, seemingly not realizing that retreat was a tactic Russia had used against invaders in the past. Napoleon had focused on combat, but neglected the politics, and as a result his extraordinary military strength, even being able to occupy Moscow, had not been enough to force his adversary to change its mind. And it's this same dynamic that's undermining Israel's actions with Iran.
3 sources tell CNN that according to an early U.S. intelligence assessment, the U.S. military strikes on 3 of Iran's nuclear facilities last weekend did not destroy the core components of the country's nuclear program and likely only set it back a few months.
While the attacks have damaged Iran's nuclear capabilities, it's far from certain it's destroyed them completely. And even if they are destroyed, is it likely the attacks have changed Iran's mind about the desirability of having nuclear weapons? After all, the best reason to have a nuke is as a deterrent, to stop yourself being attacked by another state. And being attacked by another state is just what's happened, and is what's happened repeatedly over the years. According to some reporting, hardliners increased their power as a result of these strikes, which would make sense, because if you're Iran, the arguments for moderation maybe seem weaker right now. I mean, its fairly calibrated responses to previous attacks, such as when its top general was assassinated in 2020, now look foolishly weak, and trusting to negotiation seems naive. After all, Iran's belief that there'd be no attacks while negotiations were ongoing was one of the reasons Israel's attacks were so devastatingly surprising. Meanwhile, talk of regime change helps hardliners remind moderates of the examples of states like Libya and Iraq, that despite ending their nuclear programs, nevertheless ended up getting attacked. Rather than discouraging a nuclear program, the attacks risk further cementing it as a symbol of national pride and encouraging the regime to speed up its efforts. One top official wrote on Twitter, "Even if nuclear sites are destroyed, game isn't over, enriched materials, indigenous knowledge, political will remain." Now, that could be bluster, but it could also be true. After all, India, Pakistan and North Korea all successfully developed covert nuclear weapons programs despite onerous surveillance and restrictions from the US. Israel has shown impressive military skill, but its capacity is still limited. It can't, for example, invade and occupy Iran. And in fact, as France found when it invaded Russia, even this kind of extreme military action doesn't necessarily change the mind of your opponent. Given the limits of raw military force in achieving political ends, the best approach is one that incentivizes your opponent to do the things you need for your security. This is of course what was achieved in 2015 with a deal that limited nuclear production in Iran in exchange for sanctions relief, a deal that Trump then threw in the bin. Now, as I'm recording this, there is a ceasefire holding, and let's hope that a deal emerges. But if it does, it will be of no thanks to Israel, which throughout this episode has presented no political strategy, no vision of the world that Iran would be motivated to be part of. This is characteristic of the way Israel operates, the other obvious example being Gaza.
In the half-light before dawn, Palestinians lie in the sand, shots ringing out. This said to be when more than 30 people were killed near an aid distribution site on Sunday.
And we have over 200 patients here in the emergency department with injuries, most of which are gunshot injuries.
Soon after the Hamas attacks of 2023, I made a video arguing Israel was walking into the terrorism trap. An overreaction to a brutal attack that ends up being self-defeating. And fundamentally, little has changed. I have to admit I've been shocked by the way Israel's been able to act in Gaza. The starvation, the attacks on hospitals, ambulance crews, and civilians trying to get food, all with minimal loss of support internationally. But even after all this strength, Israel's fundamentally not closer to security than it was at the beginning, because it has no political strategy. It is true many Hamas fighters are dead, including the leader, but yet the organisation persists, which is of course what everyone predicted. As the British found out fighting the IRA, or America found fighting the Vietnamese, you can kill a lot of soldiers and do little to end the political situation that creates new ones. And even if, for argument's sake, all the Hamas fighters were killed, what does Israel want to do with the 2 million civilians there? The only endgame you hear talked about is mass expulsion, ethnic cleansing. But as well as being horrific, I think Israel is overconfident if it thinks that approach will maintain American support. There's sometimes the sense that talking about political strategy, compromise, negotiation is weak. But ultimately, how strong is any approach that doesn't give you lasting security? As winter approached, Napoleon was coming under pressure. Still unable to appreciate the politics of his adversary, he'd been waiting over a month for Tsar Alexander to negotiate, but nothing had been offered. Eventually, on October the 19th, Napoleon gave the order to return to France. But from the start, the retreat was plagued by bad luck. Winter came weeks earlier than expected. Supplies that had been stockpiled were looted or spoilt, and even after winning a key battle, bad luck meant he was forced to retreat along the same route he had invaded on, a route already stripped of supplies. One of the worst strokes of luck was when Napoleon's army tried to cross the Berezina River, an event witnessed and written about by Clausewitz. Normally by November the river would be frozen, but an unexpected thaw and the destruction of the normal bridge by the Russians meant Napoleon's army was forced to build makeshift pontoon bridges under fire in freezing water, with thousands of lives lost as a result. By the end of Napoleon's retreat from Russia, his army, which had been 600,000 strong when it entered, was down to some 40,000 soldiers. In his writings, Clausewitz again and again emphasized how easily military plans can go wrong, how much is uncertain, and the role that chance and the unexpected play in determining a war's outcome. As he wrote, in war, everything is uncertain. In many ways, Israel has benefited from not only good military skill, but good fortune in the last couple of years. At the time of Hamas's original attack, Hezbollah, its ally in Lebanon, only joined in a limited way. Syria's regime fell apart amidst an unexpected uprising, giving Israel the chance to take advantage, and Trump decided to join the operation with bunker busters, something never guaranteed. Some have argued that Israel doesn't need a political strategy, as it can always just use military force when needed, the so-called mow the grass strategy. But this presumes that Israel's regional dominance will last over the coming years. As Clausewitz emphasized, luck and fortune can change. What happens after Trump leaves power, or if the US is distracted by a war elsewhere? What happens if Iran rebuilds or gets help from Russia? Israel might find that for true security, military prowess isn't enough. You need politics too. Hi, if you found that interesting, the next video I recommend you check out is the one I mentioned earlier, which is all about Israel and the terrorism trap. And if you're new here, hello, my name's Brendan. I make videos about the news, but also the ideas that explain the news at a deeper level. So yeah, thanks for watching and see you then.